Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So in continuing from where we left off last lesson, we started to speak about the topic of the menstrual cycle and the difference between that which the Yahud were upon and that which Allah SWT legislated within Al-Islam. As we found, as Allah has informed us, that the Jews had prohibited things upon themselves that Allah SWT did not prohibit. Of the practices that they had is that the woman, when she was on her cycle, had to stay in a whole separate dwelling than everyone else. So that she would have her own quarters where she would stay until she was in a state of purity. And this is not from Islam. This is not from Islam. Rather, as we learn from the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that he would still spend time and show compassion and love towards his wives during their cycles. So it's not for us to stay away from them and leave them to their own devices. La, this is not the ways of Islam. Also, it mentions regarding nisa'ukum harthu lakum fa'tu harthakum anna shi'tum وقدموا لأنفسكم واتقوا الله واعلموا أنكم ملاقوه وبشر المؤمنين. Of the things that it mentions, there's no shyness in knowledge, but what we have to understand is when they would have marital relations, the women of Medina, many of them may have been from the tribes of the Jews before, so they would only permit the husband approach them one way, that they would lie on their back and that's it. There was no other way. However, Islam also teaches that this is not the case. This is permissible in different ways. For those who are married, inshallah, they will understand. Those who are not married, you have something to look forward to. As long as it's only from the way that Allah has permitted. As for what you find some people upon of having intercourse by way of the back passage, this is haram and from the major sins. So, approaching your wife in any way that is not from that passage is fine, is permissible. And that was to also make it known that it wasn't something that was haram. As for the women of Medina, it wasn't something that they were used to. You see, it wasn't a practice that they were used to. So they had some detest towards it initially. And also we mentioned matters pertaining to ensuring that a person does not strike the face. The women, of the thing that was prohibited within the hadith, it says, "Harthuka iti harthaka anna shit." It's your come to your crops as you like, and it mentions غير ألا تضرب الوجه, except that you don't hit the face. So the things that was of the major things to be avoided is striking of the face. Striking of the face. This was a major matter. Also, a thing that was not was also prohibited is making dua against the woman that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make their face ugly and the likes. These things are prohibited. And one should ask themselves, how could one desire to treat their wife in such a manner? How can one desire to treat their wife in such a manner? This is not from the objectives of Zawaj. Now, of the things that Allah SWT has mentioned, ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة. Now, of the things Allah mentions, and He is the one who created from you your spouses. Now, why? لتسكنوا إليها, to find tranquility, sakina. Now, also وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة, and Allah placed between you love and mercy. So it's not befitting for the husband to be a tyrant, to be abusive, verbally, emotionally, physically. This is not permitted. you see. And in some situations, unfortunately, you find as well, there's cases where the woman, she's, mashallah, physically abusive. And again, this is not permitted. And one should not feel comfortable to live in a situation as such. And also, it's important for women to know you're not obliged to live in such circumstances. And you have every right to go to the people of authority in your lands, also to the religious leaders from the imams of the masajid, to seek counsel and aid. But what you find, unfortunately, today, some brothers, they tell your wife, you're not allowed to go to anyone about our marital problems. We keep it in the house, but they're not willing to sort out the issue. So what are we doing? How can you say don't go and speak to someone when we have issues, but you're not willing to sort out the issues? This is another way of emotional manipulation. And when this occurs, you find the woman feels trapped, that she has no avenue of help. And that's not the case. That is not the case. And brothers should be cautious when it becomes known if they're abusive physically and the like, because you have some people, they won't tolerate that. They won't tolerate that. So one should be cautious. But also the women should know they have every right to seek advice and aid from those necessary. So, as we can see in situations like this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us clear guidelines how to function and how to deal with each other. Of the thing that's also mentioned regarding this topic of how to approach one's wife intimately, of the thing that is mentioned, استحيوا من الله حق الحياء لا تأتوا النساء في أدبارهن. Have shyness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the best way. Don't approach the women from the back passage. This is something that is haram. Also, if a person does something like this, it shows they have no shyness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also of the things that's mentioned, لا ينظر الله إلى رجل جامع امرأته في دبرها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not look at a man, and this means on Yawm al-Qiyamah, Allah will not look at a man who entered his wife from her back passage. Again, this shows that it's something that is haram. And from the major sins. Also, when it mentions what time does the class start? So usually the class is supposed to start at 7. However, today I had an urgent situation that someone needed some advice why I was delayed. But generally speaking, class we will start at 7 inshallah ta'ala. As the Salah Maghrib approaches earlier, we will continue for a bit after the Salah also, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Now, when it mentions in the ayah, وَقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ, now, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّكُمْ مُلَاقُوهُ وَبَشِّرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and bring something forth for yourself of goodness, من فعل الطاعات, from the actions of righteousness, مع امتثال ما نهاكم عنه من ترك المحرمات, also by avoiding that which you have been prohibited from. And fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that you're going to return back to Allah Azza wa Jal, فَيُحَاسِبُكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَعْمَالِكُمْ جَمِيعًا. Then you'll be held accountable for all of your actions. Of the things that I mentioned, when Allah said, Ibn Abbas, he says, well, Allah says, وَقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ, and do something forth for yourself. It mentions, يَقُولُ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ, before entering the wife, to mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, say Bismillah, at-tasmiyah inda al-jama'. And he mentions فقد ثبت في صحيح البخاري عن ابن عباس قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لو أن أحدكم إذا أراد أن يأتي أهله قال بسم الله اللهم جنبنا الشيطان وجنبنا الشيطان ما رزقتنا فإنه إن يقدر بينهما ولد في ذلك لم يضره الشيطان أبدا. So in this hadith it mentions when one of you wants to come and approach his wife, then let him say Bismillah and O Allah, distance us from shaitan and distance shaitan from us, from that which you have provided for us. It mentions if it was decreed that there were, from that moment of marital relations, that a child was to be born from that, no shaitan, the shaitan will not harm that child ever. So even in times of having marital intimacy, we're taught to always be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even marital intimacy is an act of ibadah, is an act of worship. And it's from the objectives of marriage. So it's not befitting that we get complaints that a person, the wife is either complaining, the husband shows no intimacy. They are not intimate, they don't have marital relations often. Or vice versa. It's not befitting. Because how is a person supposed to safeguard their private parts from haram if they're not even satisfying themselves in a way that is halal? Does that make sense? No. So, and we also learn from the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu when he mentioned ذهب أهل الدثور بالأجور, the wealthy of the Sahaba have taken all the rewards. But within the hadith, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu taught them that when you have intimacy with your wife, that this is something you get reward for. There's an ajr in this, there's a reward. And they said, are we rewarded for this? The Prophet said, are you not sinful if you did it in a way that was haram? And it shows the beauty of Islam. There is nothing except that Allah has given us clear guidance. Clear guidance for that which is in our best interest and that which is best for mankind. And also to understand from the objectives of marriage isn't just to fulfill your desires, but to have children. To have children. And raise those children upon Islam, that there also are those who call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet Muhammad mentioned, he wanted to boast about this ummah and the number of this ummah on Yawm al-Qiyamah. That's only going to come by way of marriage and then bearing children. But again, this dua is actually so amazing that a person is conscious that when they approach their wife, we're not to behave like animals. One is still to be composed and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember, you being able to approach your wife is a ni'mah, is a favor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. That Allah decreed that you had a wife that was pleasing to you. This is a virtue from Allah Azza wa Jal. And then the children that will come from those marital relations is also from the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. So again, one is conscious of that. When you approach your wife, you remember these supplications. What time is it today, Sheikh? 45? Sheikh will call the adhan. I think we have the other one there. The other one, the wire one, yeah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
No. So,
Awesome.
so yeah, as we was mentioning, that again in that moment in time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated that one is to remember and call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect them from shaitan and that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides them with of offspring from shaitan also. This also aids us in understanding the objective of the pursuit of marriage as well. When a person is pursuing marriage, in reality, you should only pursue someone who's going to benefit your Islam. Someone who's going to be a benefit to your Islam, that you can visualize that you're going to have children and be able to raise them upon Islam. You see, the ideal husband is going to be someone who has good character as a Muslim. And the ideal wife, someone who has good characteristics as a Muslim woman. That's the reality. You see, because some of the factors people seek marriage for are things that are temporary. For example, some of the young brothers, they get amazed by someone's looks. When they come to realize that fades away. It doesn't mean it fades away in terms of a person no longer looks good. It means, for example, that a person, even if they look good, if their manners are horrible, immediately they start to become unattractive by way of their manners, their character. You see? So, the advice of the Prophet Muhammad to us was, فَظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ. Seek success with the one who has religion. And what will happen? It will be like your hands are filled with sand. And when you try to grab sand, what happens? It just comes out your hand with ease. And it's not going to be any hardship. There's not going to be any hardship. Because when a person has Islam, you see, when we do something wrong, we expect that I'm able to speak to you on a level that we both understand. Look, what you're doing is disobedience to Allah Azza wa Jal. If a person doesn't have arrogance, they'll say, do you know what is true? Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. They'll rectify their affairs. But if they don't have that Islam and that fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they'll be overtaken by pride. Give you an example. Last week, the car park, the entrance there. A brother, mashallah, nice car, Mubarak alayh. But having a nice car doesn't mean you can violate the code of the road. He's blocking the pathway. It says clear in red, no parking, car parking, constant use. I asked him to move it. He's not listening. He's staying there. So I asked him, I guess, are you Muslim? He said, what's it got to do with it? Whether I'm Muslim, whether I'm Christian, or whether I'm Jew. I knew he's Muslim. I said, because if you're Muslim, we can have a common understanding. When I tell you what you're doing is haram, you understand the gravity of what you're doing now. And he goes, but I know Arabic. I'm Arab. I know more Arabic than you, X, Y, and Z. I said, do you even know who I am? And this is not to boast. Obviously, I'm the Imam of the Masjid. So you talking about knowing more Arabic than me, we haven't even started talking Arabic yet. We haven't even said anything in Arabic except for Assalamu alaikum. And then secondly, he says, I'm Imam as well, I'm more knowledgeable than you. I was like, it's not a knowledge competition. Clearly right now you didn't know you're doing something wrong. But when the objective was, look, if I tell you this is haram, you're supposed to say, do you know what, subhanallah, let me stop having pride and move my car. Because the tariq, it has rights. And said the tariq is from the ways of transgressing on the rights of the path. You can't block the path and cause hardship for people. This is not permissible. So again, what happens? If we have this common ground, husband and wife is more important than this. If the husband fears Allah, the wife fears Allah, when one of them is doing something wrong and the other one comes to advise the other one, their fear of Allah will allow them to overcome pride. Say, you know what? I am falling short in this right. I'm going to work on it. Also, the approach is different. When a person fears Allah, they're not trying to say something's going to end their marriage straight away. They're not going to be abusive. The mistake that we make is how comes sometimes we speak better to our friends than to our wives. It doesn't make sense. You know, you might talk to your wife away, as soon as the brother comes, oh, Assalamu alaikum, Habibi. What? But the wife calls your name, what? Why are you calling me for? As soon as her friend phones, oh, Akhi, where are you? How's it going? Long time. But your wife, you never ask how she is. You see? So then, what happens? Your wife starts saying, maybe you have issues. You don't really like women. I'm being serious. They say stuff like this. You show more love to the brothers than your wife. Allah musta'an. You have to be cautious, ikhwan. You see, as we mentioned earlier, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. But inshallah I will stop here today. Obviously it will be a short one. Apologies, as this is the reality of our position in da'wah, being an imam. There was an urgent matter that needed advice. So the lesson was delayed a bit. But inshallah ta'ala, from next week, again, as I mentioned, we'll start at 7. The classes will be upstairs. All of the classes now will be upstairs. And Salah Maghrib will be upstairs as well, inshallah ta'ala. And as it gets earlier, we'll pause for Salah and continue after Salah. So 7:15, sorry, 7:15. We start from 7:15 because we have madrasa that will finish first. And then 7:15 we'll start. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. جزاكم الله خيرا وصلي وسلم على نبينا وحبيب محمد وعلى اله وصحبه اجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته.